lion sat on his throne, a large rock overlooking the vast landscape. His mane glowed like fire, and his roar echoed across the land, sending birds fluttering into the air. All the animals of the savannah feared him, for the lion was not only the strongest, but also the most arrogant of all creatures. He ruled with a heavy paw, demanding respect from everyone. The lion believed his strength made him untouchable. Each day he boasted about his victories and the fear he instilled in the hearts of the other animals. To him, power was the only thing that mattered. His rule was absolute, and the savannah bent to his will, or so he thought. As the lion grew older, his arrogance knew no bounds. He would call all the animals together just to show off his strength. "Watch me, the mighty king of the savannah!" he would roar, crushing boulders with his paws or chasing down prey with lightning speed. The animals gathered, not out of admiration, but out of fear. They trembled as they watched him, knowing that a single mistake could bring his wrath upon them. One day, the lion gathered the animals once more. His voice thundered across the plain as he declared, "I am the greatest of all. Is there anyone here who dares challenge my strength?" The smaller creatures shook their heads, avoiding his gaze. No one had ever dared to stand up to the lion, and they believed no one ever would. In the shadow of a great tree, far from the lion's boasting, the tortoise rested. Unlike the lion, the tortoise did not seek attention. He was small, slow, and unremarkable to the other animals, but he was known for his great wisdom. Those who came to him for advice left with peace in their hearts and solutions to their problems. But the tortoise preferred the quiet life, watching the savannah from afar, while the lion's arrogance continued to grow. Though the tortoise never sought the spotlight, he had been observing the lion for quite some time. He could see that the lion's pride was blinding him, and that his rule was built on fear, not respect. The tortoise understood that such leadership was fragile, and while no one dared to oppose the lion openly, the tortoise knew the time would come when the great king's strength would be tested. Not by power, but by wit. One morning, the lion woke in an unusually restless mood. Bored of his daily victories, he sought something more thrilling to prove his dominance. With a mighty roar, he summoned all the animals of the savannah. As they gathered in trembling silence, the lion declared, "I am invincible. I am the greatest. But what is a king without a worthy opponent? Who among you dares challenge my strength?" The animals looked at one another, hoping someone else would step forward, but none did. The antelopes shuffled nervously, the elephants swayed their trunks, and the smaller creatures crouched low to the ground. The lion grinned, pleased with the fear he inspired. But just as the lion was about to dismiss them all, a small voice spoke up from the back of the crowd. The animals parted slowly, revealing the source of the voice. To everyone's surprise, it was the tortoise. With deliberate slowness, he made his way forward, his shell gleaming in the sunlight. The other animals watched in stunned silence. Surely, this tiny creature couldn't be serious. How could the slow, seemingly weak tortoise even think of challenging the mighty lion? The lion's laughter filled the air. "You, the slowest and smallest of creatures, think you can challenge me?" he roared. His tail flicked with amusement, and the other animals, unsure of what to do, remained silent. But the tortoise showed no fear. "Strength isn't everything, lion," he said calmly. "Sometimes it's not the size of one's muscles, but the sharpness of one's mind that wins the day." The lion, still chuckling, could hardly believe the tortoise's audacity. "You dare speak of mind and wisdom in front of me? I could crush you under a single paw." His eyes glimmered with amusement, but beneath it a flicker of irritation appeared. He didn't like being questioned, especially by someone as insignificant as the tortoise. The tortoise raised his head slowly and met the lion's gaze without flinching. "Perhaps you could crush me, but let us see if you can outthink me," the tortoise said. "I accept your challenge, lion, and I propose a contest of wit and strength. We will see who is truly the greatest." The crowd gasped. Never had anyone spoken to the lion with such boldness. The other animals, who had always feared the lion's strength, were intrigued. Could the slow and wise tortoise actually outsmart the king of the savannah? The lion's laughter grew louder, filling the air. He paced back and forth, his tail swishing in amusement. "You outsmart me? This will be the easiest challenge of my life." "Very well, Tortoise. I accept your challenge, and when I win, I will make sure everyone remembers that I am not only the strongest, but also the wisest. Quiet unsettled the lion, though he didn't show it. The other animals remained quiet, unsure of what to expect. They had never seen anyone challenge the lion, and they certainly hadn't expected the tortoise to be the one brave enough to step forward. Before the contest began, the tortoise gave the lion one last warning. Lion, strength alone is not enough to rule. Sometimes the smallest creatures can teach the biggest lessons. You might win with force, but wisdom cannot be crushed by muscle. If you rely only on power, you will fall. The lion growled softly, impatient with the tortoise's words. Enough of your riddles, tortoise. Let us begin. What is this contest you speak of? I am ready to defeat you at any game you choose. The tortoise smiled faintly. Very well then, let us race. From here to the great baobab tree on the horizon, the first to touch its bark wins. The lion smirked. This was too easy. The lion crouched low, ready to bolt at full speed, while the tortoise stood patiently at the starting line. The animals watched closely, their eyes flicking between the competitors. The lion, with his massive body, would surely win this race in an instant. It seemed foolish for the tortoise to suggest such a contest. On your mark, said the tortoise calmly. Get set, go. The lion took off in a flash, his paws pounding the earth as he raced toward the baobab tree. The tortoise, meanwhile, moved slowly, his legs carrying him at a steady, deliberate pace. The other animals exchanged glances. This would be over before it began. But the tortoise had a plan. As the lion raced ahead, laughing at how slow the tortoise was, the clever creature had already put his plan into motion. Unbeknownst to the lion, the tortoise had placed his relatives, each identical in appearance, at intervals along the race path. Every time the lion thought he was gaining distance, another tortoise would appear farther ahead, much to the lion's confusion. The lion, still sprinting, was puzzled. How can this be? He roared in frustration. I am the fastest in the savannah, yet the tortoise keeps appearing ahead of me. With each glimpse of the tortoise, the lion pushed himself harder, not realizing the clever trick that was unfolding. The race was not about speed alone. It was about strategy, and the tortoise was proving that wisdom could outrun even the fastest of lions. As the lion raced toward the baobab tree, his heart pounded with confidence. He knew no one could outrun him, especially not the slow-moving tortoise. The wind rushed through his golden mane as he pushed his muscular legs to their limit. The baobab tree loomed in the distance, and the finish line seemed just moments away. Behind him, the tortoise had only taken a few steps, moving slowly but surely. The other animals, though doubtful, watched in silence. They had seen the tortoise's wisdom in small things, but never imagined he could stand a chance against the lion in a contest of speed. However, the tortoise's eyes held a quiet determination, and those who looked closely noticed that he wasn't worried at all. The lion's laughter echoed as he glanced back and saw the tortoise still crawling along. Too easy, the lion thought, feeling the thrill of victory surge through him. He bounded across the savannah, certain the race would soon be over. He couldn't resist slowing down just a little to enjoy the show. It would be over in a matter of minutes, after all. Meanwhile, the tortoise continued his steady pace, never once speeding up or slowing down. He had no need to rush, for his plan was already in motion. The first of his relatives, cleverly disguised to look just like him, was waiting ahead, hidden among the tall grasses, ready to take his place when the lion wasn't looking. Ahead of the lion, hidden along the race route, one of the tortoise's cousins prepared to act. The tortoise had known he could not beat the lion with speed alone, so he had gathered his family to help. Each cousin looked just like him, and with careful planning, they stationed themselves at different points along the path, hidden from sight. When the lion ran past, the first cousin stepped onto the trail, giving the illusion that the tortoise had somehow leaped ahead. As the lion rounded the next corner, he saw the tortoise, seemingly far ahead of him. What? He growled in disbelief. How did he get there? Confused but determined, the lion surged forward again, pushing his legs harder than ever. The lion's mind raced as fast as his legs. He was the king of the savannah, known for his speed and strength. How could the tortoise, of all creatures, be ahead of him? His pride was wounded, but he refused to slow down. He would catch up. He had to. When the lion caught sight of the tortoise again, this time even farther ahead, his confusion turned to frustration. "This is impossible," he roared, his breath coming in ragged bursts. But the sight of the tortoise, seemingly still plodding along without breaking a sweat, spurred him on. He increased his speed, desperate to regain his lead. As the lion continued to race toward the baobab tree, his frustration grew with each passing second. No matter how fast he ran, the tortoise always seemed to appear just ahead of him. The more he pushed, the more bewildered he became. It was as though the tortoise had some secret power that allowed him to teleport from one point to another. By now, the other animals were watching in awe. The lion's once confident strides had turned frantic, while the tortoise seemed unbothered by the pace of the race. Some animals began to whisper among themselves. Could it be that the tortoise was really outsmarting the lion? The baobab tree stood tall on the horizon, its wide branches spreading like a giant's arms. The lion, though exhausted, could see the finish line now. His muscles burned from the effort, and his pride was bruised. But he knew he had to win. This was his kingdom, and losing to a slow creature like the tortoise would be unthinkable. As the lion pushed forward with every ounce of strength he had left, he noticed something strange. There was the tortoise again, only a few feet from the tree. "No," the lion growled. He leaped forward in a final burst of speed, determined to reach the tree before the tortoise did. In that final moment, when the lion was just inches from victory, the tortoise touched the baobab tree. A cheer went up from the animals watching in the distance. The lion skidded to a stop, his heart pounding and his breath ragged. He had lost. The mighty king of the savannah, defeated by the slow, clever tortoise. For a moment there was silence. The lion stared at the tortoise, who stood calmly by the tree, his expression serene. "How?" the lion finally asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "How did you win?" The tortoise smiled and said, "Sometimes, lion, it is not speed but wisdom that wins the race." The lion's roar of frustration shook the trees. His eyes blazed with fury, and his claws dug into the earth. "You must have cheated," he bellowed. "There's no way you could have beaten me fairly." The tortoise, unfazed by the lion's outburst, remained calm. "I did not cheat, lion," he said. "I simply used my mind, and that is something you seem to underestimate." The tortoise's voice was steady, but his words carried a sharp lesson. The lion, for all his power, had been outsmarted by a creature half his size. Still, the lion could not accept it. His pride was too great, and the humiliation too deep. "No," he growled. "This was not a fair test. I demand another challenge, something that truly proves my strength." The animals murmured among themselves. Some had suspected that the tortoise would find a clever way to win, but none had expected the lion to react so angrily. They had always seen him as a mighty ruler, but now many began to question if his strength alone was enough to make him a wise leader. The tortoise, however, knew this moment held a deeper lesson. "Lion," he said, "you may be strong, but there is more to winning than power. Patience, wisdom, and strategy can often outdo brute force. The race was never about speed, it was about thinking ahead." But the lion, still fuming, refused to listen. "Enough," he roared. "I will not be mocked by a creature as small as you. Name your next challenge, and I will show everyone that I am not only the strongest, but the greatest in all things." The lion stood tall, his chest puffed out, as he waited for the tortoise's response. He could not bear the thought of losing to a creature he considered inferior. He had always ruled by strength, and now his reputation was on the line. If the tortoise did not name another challenge, the lion would create one himself. The tortoise looked up at the towering lion, his eyes calm and thoughtful. He knew the lion's anger came from wounded pride, but he also knew that this arrogance would be the lion's downfall if left unchecked. "Very well, lion," the tortoise said slowly. "We will have another challenge, but remember, wisdom cannot be crushed by strength alone. For our next test, we will compete in a trial of strength. But beware, for it is not only your muscles that will be tested." The lion grinned, confident that he would win this time. "A trial of strength it is," he growled. And when I win, all will know that the lion is not to be outwitted by anyone." The lion's eyes gleamed with anticipation. He was certain that, this time, no clever tricks could save the tortoise from defeat. "Tell me, Tortoise," the lion growled, "what is this trial of strength you propose? I am ready for any test." The tortoise, still calm and thoughtful, spoke slowly. "We shall have a boulder-pushing contest. We will each find a large boulder and push it across the valley. The one who moves their boulder the furthest wins. But remember, lion, strength alone may not be enough." The lion laughed. "A boulder-pushing contest? Excellent. I will move a boulder so far that you won't even be able to see me." Without another word, the lion rushed off to find the largest boulder he could manage. While the lion dashed away, eager to show his strength, the tortoise moved slowly, inspecting the boulders scattered across the valley. He eventually found a solid, medium-sized rock and began thinking of how best to move it. The lion, of course, would rely on brute force, but the tortoise knew that pushing such a heavy object for too long would tire even the mightiest creature. He would need to use his mind once again. The tortoise remembered the vines and pulleys he had once used to move smaller objects around his home. If he could arrange something similar, perhaps he could move his boulder more efficiently without exhausting himself. With this idea in mind, he set off to gather the materials he needed, knowing that the lion would never expect such a plan. While the lion was busy shoving his boulder with all his might, the tortoise worked quietly in the shadows. He found strong vines hanging from the nearby trees and gathered sticks and stones to create a simple pulley system. With careful precision, he tied the vines around the boulder and attached them to the tree branches overhead. Satisfied with his contraption, the tortoise gave a small tug on the vine. The boulder, heavy as it was, began to shift slightly. He smiled to himself. His plan was working. While the lion strained himself, the tortoise would use his simple machine to move the boulder with much less effort. He returned to his boulder, confident that wisdom would once again prevail over brute strength. The lion, meanwhile, had found the largest boulder he could carry. His muscles bulged as he pushed and shoved, groaning under the weight of the stone. At first, the boulder moved easily across the flat ground, and the lion's confidence swelled. "Look at me," he roared, hoping the other animals were watching. "See how far I push this great boulder." But as the day grew hotter and the valley became steeper, the lion began to slow. His muscles burned and sweat dripped from his mane. The boulder, which had once seemed so easy to move, now felt like a mountain in itself. Still, the lion refused to stop. He would not be outdone by the tortoise. The animals gathered at the edge of the valley, watching the contest unfold. They saw the lion panting and groaning as he struggled to push his enormous boulder. His once confident roar had turned into low growls of frustration, but he continued to push, determined to prove his strength. Then their eyes turned to the tortoise. Slowly, steadily, the tortoise tugged on the vines he had tied around his boulder. With each gentle pull, the boulder inched forward, gliding over the uneven ground. The animals were amazed. The tortoise wasn't straining at all, and yet his boulder was moving just as far, if not farther, than the lion's. Whispers of admiration spread through the crowd. "Perhaps the tortoise will win again," some murmured. "He is so clever." As the lion pushed with all his might, his anger began to boil over. Each time he glanced at the tortoise, who appeared to be effortlessly moving his boulder, the lion's frustration grew. How could this be happening again? He had thought this contest would finally prove his superiority, yet here was the tortoise, outsmarting him once more. With a final, mighty shove, the lion pushed his boulder a few more feet. Exhausted, he sat down for a moment to catch his breath. "How is this possible?" he muttered to himself. "I am the strongest creature in the savannah. How is this little tortoise making it look so easy?" But the lion's anger only fueled his determination. He rose again and continued pushing, his eyes fixed on the boulder ahead. As the contest wore on, the tortoise continued his steady work, pulling on the vines with patience and care. He noticed the lion's struggles, but he did not mock or taunt him. The tortoise understood that the lion's pride was his greatest obstacle, and there was no need to make things worse by boasting. Instead, the tortoise focused on his task, calmly and quietly. Each pull of the vine brought his boulder closer to the finish line, and the other animals began to cheer softly for him. But the tortoise remained humble. He knew that winning was not about gloating or showing off, but about using his wisdom to overcome the challenges in front of him. By now, many of the animals had gathered to watch the contest. They had always feared the lion, respecting him for his strength, but seeing him struggle now made them realize something else. Strength alone was not enough. The tortoise, though small and slow, had outsmarted the lion once again, and this time it was in a test of strength. As they watched the tortoise move his boulder with ease, the animals began to understand an important lesson. Sometimes, wisdom and strategy could achieve what brute force could not. They started to question the lion's arrogance and began to see the tortoise in a new light. Not as weak, but as someone who used his mind to solve problems. The lion's face twisted with frustration as he watched the tortoise move his boulder farther and farther across the valley. Sweat dripped down his mane, and his muscles burned with exhaustion, but the tortoise showed no signs of struggle. With each gentle pull of the vine, the boulder crept closer to the finish line. The lion could feel his pride slipping away. He had always been the king of the savannah, the strongest and most feared creature around, but now he was being outdone by a small, humble tortoise. His anger surged, and he bared his teeth, determined to push his boulder just a little further. Desperate to win, the lion's mind turned to darker thoughts. He knew that the tortoise's boulder was lighter than his own, and this fact filled him with resentment. He glanced at the tortoise's contraption and saw the vines pulling the boulder along with ease. If I can't win fairly, the lion thought, I'll find another way to secure my victory. With a low growl, the lion began to devise a plan. He would sabotage the tortoise's contraption when no one was looking, ensuring that the tortoise's boulder could no longer move. When the tortoise is left helpless, I'll push my boulder past his and finally prove that I'm the true king, the lion thought. But as he plotted, the tortoise quietly continued his steady progress, unaware of the lion's dangerous scheme. The lion's plan formed quickly as his jealousy grew. While the tortoise was resting by his boulder, preparing for another pull, the lion quietly crept closer. He moved with all the stealth his enormous body could muster, eyes fixed on the tortoise's contraption. With a swift swipe of his massive paw, the lion severed one of the main vines holding the pulley system together. The rope snapped and coiled to the ground, leaving the boulder immovable. The lion retreated quickly, his heart racing with excitement. Now, when the tortoise tried to move his boulder again, it would refuse to budge. I'll win this time, the lion thought, satisfied with his sabotage. When the tortoise returned to his boulder, he did not immediately notice the damage. He pulled at the vine, expecting the boulder to roll smoothly forward as it had before. But this time, nothing happened. Frowning, the tortoise examined his contraption, soon discovering that one of the key vines had been severed. The animals watched in confusion, wondering what had gone wrong. The tortoise, ever calm and observant, suspected foul play. This vine didn't break on its own, he murmured to himself, his sharp eyes scanning the valley. Though he didn't see the lion watching from a distance, he had a strong feeling that the mighty king had something to do with it. Rather than grow angry, the tortoise simply smiled to himself. He knew the lion's pride had likely driven him to sabotage the contest, but the tortoise also knew that patience was a greater strength than anger. If he reacted hastily, he would only give the lion the satisfaction he craved. Slowly and carefully, the tortoise began to repair his contraption. He found more vines from nearby trees and wove them together to replace the broken ones. It took time, but the tortoise was in no hurry. As the other animals watched in awe, the tortoise worked steadily, showing that even when things go wrong, a wise mind can solve the problem without haste or frustration. From his hiding spot, the lion smirked, believing the tortoise was finished. His boulder won't move now, the lion thought. I'll win this contest and finally put an end to this nonsense about brains being better than brawn. Feeling victorious, the lion returned to his boulder, planting his paws firmly against it. His body ached from the previous effort, but with renewed confidence, he pushed again. The boulder moved, but only a little. Despite his earlier success, the lion was exhausted from the strain. and every muscle in his body screamed in protest. Still, he pushed forward, confident that the tortoise could not catch up. While the lion struggled with his boulder, the tortoise finished repairing his pulley system. His steady hands and clever mind had worked out the problem, and now, with the new vines in place, the boulder was once again ready to move. He gave a gentle tug on the vine, and to the amazement of the watching animals, the boulder rolled smoothly forward once more. The animals began to cheer quietly for the tortoise, whose patience and wisdom had turned the situation around. They admired how the tortoise had not grown angry or frustrated, but instead used his intelligence to overcome the obstacle. Slowly but surely, the tortoise continued to move his boulder forward, inching closer to the finish line. Meanwhile, the lion's body was nearing its limit. Every muscle was sore, and his paws were raw from pushing the boulder. Each step forward was a battle against his own exhaustion. He looked up to see the finish line still far in the distance and felt frustration boiling inside him. The animals, sensing the tension in the air, began to gather more closely around the valley. They watched in awe as the tortoise's boulder rolled steadily toward the finish line, while the lion, mighty as he was, appeared to be at his limit. For the first time, they saw the lion's vulnerability. His strength was failing him, and he had no plan beyond sheer force. As the tortoise continued his progress, cheers erupted from the crowd. The smaller animals, once too frightened to speak up against the lion's arrogance, began to realize that the tortoise's wisdom and patience were far more powerful than they had imagined. "Go, tortoise," they cried. "You can do it." Hearing the cheers for the tortoise only fueled the lion's desperation. His heart pounded in his chest, and his pride was crushed beneath the weight of his own failure. The tortoise, the smallest and slowest of creatures, was winning again. The thought was unbearable to the lion, who had always believed that power and strength were the most important qualities a ruler could possess. With a roar of frustration, the lion threw his body against the boulder, using every ounce of his remaining strength to move it just a few more inches. But his body had reached its limit, and the boulder barely moved. Exhausted and humiliated, the lion slumped to the ground, panting heavily as he watched the tortoise approach the finish line. The tortoise, sensing the end of the contest was near, kept his focus on the task at hand. He knew the lion's desperation would only drive him to make mistakes, and sure enough, the lion's anger had led him to exhaustion. The tortoise did not gloat or hurry. Instead, he continued with his steady pace, knowing that wisdom had already won. With a final gentle tug on the vine, the tortoise's boulder crossed the finish line. The crowd erupted into cheers, and the tortoise gave a humble nod to the animals gathered around. He had proven once again that intelligence, patience, and careful planning could outdo even the mightiest of opponents. The lion watched in disbelief as the tortoise crossed the finish line. His body ached, his pride was shattered, and for the first time, he was forced to confront the truth. The tortoise, though small and seemingly weak, had beaten him fairly. And not just once, but twice. Anger and frustration bubbled inside him, but beneath it all was something the lion had never felt before: humility. He had relied too heavily on his strength, assuming it was the only thing that mattered. Now, seeing the tortoise's calm victory, the lion realized there was more to being a leader than brute force. The crowd of animals cheered the tortoise's name, but the lion remained silent, lost in thought. As the animals gathered around to congratulate the tortoise, he remained humble, just as he had after the first contest. He did not boast about his victory or mock the lion for his failure. Instead, the tortoise thanked the animals for their support and reminded them that the true lesson of the contest was not about winning or losing. The lesson, the tortoise said softly, is that wisdom and patience can accomplish things that brute strength alone cannot. We must always remember that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest voice has the most to say. The animals nodded in agreement, their admiration for the tortoise growing even more. The lion remained silent as the tortoise spoke, his head bowed in shame. He had always believed that strength was everything, but now he was beginning to understand that his arrogance had blinded him. The tortoise had outsmarted him not once, but twice, and yet the tortoise had never been cruel or boastful about it. For the first time, the lion began to reflect on his actions. Perhaps there was more to leadership than strength alone. Perhaps wisdom, patience, and humility were just as important. The thought was new to him, and though his pride still stung, the lion felt a small seed of change beginning to grow inside him. Despite his growing understanding, the lion was not yet ready to admit defeat. His pride, though shaken, still urged him to prove himself. "Tortoise," the lion growled, rising to his feet, "I will not be outdone so easily. Name another challenge, and this time I will win." The tortoise, ever patient, looked up at the lion and smiled gently. "Very well, lion. If you wish for another contest, I will oblige. But remember, strength alone is not the path to victory. Our next challenge will test more than just your muscles. It will test your mind." The lion frowned, unsure of what the tortoise meant, but he nodded. "I accept," he said, determined to redeem himself. The animals gathered once more, eager to hear what the tortoise's next challenge would be. The lion stood tall, his pride still bruised, but his determination burning strong. He had failed twice, but he was convinced that this time he would finally defeat the tortoise and prove that strength could outmatch intelligence. The tortoise, thoughtful as always, took his time before announcing the new challenge. "For our next test, lion, we shall play a game of strategy. We will build a trap, a snare to catch the cleverest of animals. Whoever sets the best trap wins the challenge." The lion blinked in confusion. "A trap? But I am a hunter, not a trapper." The tortoise smiled. "That is the point, lion. You must use your mind to set a trap, not just your strength. A true leader knows how to plan ahead and think carefully." The lion's heart sank slightly. This was not the kind of challenge he had expected. He was accustomed to using his strength, speed, and raw power to catch prey, not his mind. But his pride would not allow him to back down now. "Very well, tortoise," the lion growled. "I will accept this challenge. I will set a trap so cunning, even you will not escape it." The tortoise nodded. "We will each set our traps, and the other animals will judge whose is the most clever and effective. But remember, lion, this challenge is not about speed or power. It is about patience, thought, and precision." The lion still felt unsure, but his desire to prove himself was stronger than his doubts. "I will not lose," he told himself. "I will outsmart the tortoise this time." The lion set off to prepare his trap, wandering through the savannah in search of materials. As he gathered vines and branches, his mind raced. He had never built a trap before. He had always relied on his strength and speed to catch his prey. But now, he needed to think like the tortoise. He needed to be clever, careful, and patient. However, patience was not the lion's strength. Frustration bubbled up inside him as he tried to tie the vines into knots. His large paws were not suited for such delicate work, and the vines kept slipping through his claws. "This is impossible," he growled. "How does the tortoise make this look so easy?" Still, the lion refused to give up. He worked late into the evening, determined to build a trap that would outsmart even the cleverest of animals. While the lion struggled, the tortoise moved with quiet confidence. He knew the lion's frustration would work against him, and so he took his time, carefully considering every detail of his trap. The tortoise had spent years observing the other animals and knew how they thought, how they moved, and how they reacted to danger. The tortoise decided to build a simple but effective snare, using a network of vines hidden beneath a pile of leaves. He placed the trap near a popular watering hole, where he knew the animals would gather. The snare would tighten the moment an unsuspecting creature stepped into it, and with its careful design, the trap would capture its target with ease. The tortoise smiled to himself as he worked. This challenge was not about strength, it was about understanding, patience, and wisdom. The lion, meanwhile, was growing more and more frustrated. His trap was clumsy and rushed, and no matter how hard he tried, it didn't seem to work. The vines wouldn't hold, the branches snapped under pressure, and the design didn't make sense. But the lion's pride kept him pushing forward, unwilling to admit defeat. After hours of struggling, the lion finally stepped back to survey his work. The trap was crude and messy, but it was the best he could do. He placed it in a clearing where the animals often passed and hoped that it would somehow work. "I am the king of the savannah," he muttered to himself. "I can outsmart any creature, even the tortoise." With their traps set, The lion and the tortoise returned to the gathering of animals. The other creatures, eager to see the outcome, followed them to the sites where the traps had been placed. The first test would be the tortoise's trap, set by the watering hole. As the animals approached, they saw a curious antelope wandering toward the watering hole. It stepped carefully through the grass, unaware of the snare hidden beneath the leaves. The tortoise watched closely as the antelope moved closer and closer. Then, in a single moment, the antelope stepped directly into the trap. The snare tightened smoothly around the antelope's leg, holding it in place without harm. The other animals gasped in admiration. "The tortoise has done it again," they whispered. "His trap is so simple, yet so effective." Next, the animals followed the lion to the clearing where his trap had been set. The lion stood tall, hoping that his trap would work as intended. But deep down, he felt uncertain. His trap was not as carefully designed as the tortoise's, and the frustration he had felt while building it still lingered. As the animals gathered around, a rabbit hopped into the clearing, curious about the commotion. It wandered near the lion's trap, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. The lion held his breath, waiting for the trap to spring. But when the rabbit finally stepped on the vines, the trap failed to tighten. The branches snapped, the vines fell apart, and the rabbit scampered away unharmed. The lion's trap had failed completely, and the animals were silent in disbelief. The lion's face flushed with embarrassment as the animals whispered among themselves. His trap had failed, and once again, the tortoise had proven himself to be the wiser of the two. The lion's pride, already wounded from the previous contests, was now crushed. The tortoise, ever humble, did not gloat or mock the lion. Instead, he approached the defeated king with kindness in his eyes. "Lion," the tortoise said gently, "you are strong and mighty, but you must learn that strength alone cannot solve every problem. Wisdom, patience, and thoughtfulness are just as important." The lion lowered his head in shame, unable to argue. He had failed to outsmart the tortoise once again, and he was beginning to understand that his reliance on strength had been his downfall. The tortoise, seeing the lion's sadness, offered a small smile. "Lion, it is not too late to learn," he said. "You are a great ruler, but even great rulers must understand the value of wisdom. A true leader knows that strength and intelligence must work together. Only then can they truly succeed." The lion listened carefully to the tortoise's words, and for the first time, he felt a glimmer of understanding. He had spent his entire life believing that power was the only thing that mattered. But now, after losing to the tortoise in challenge after challenge, he realized that there was more to leadership than he had once thought. Perhaps, the lion considered, it was time to learn from the tortoise rather than challenge him. After a long moment of silence, the lion finally spoke. "Tortoise," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I have been wrong. I have let my pride and arrogance blind me. I thought strength was everything, but you have shown me that there is more to being a leader. For that, I thank you." The other animals watched in awe as the mighty lion humbled himself before the tortoise. They had never seen their king admit defeat, and it was clear that the lion had learned a valuable lesson. The tortoise, wise and gracious, nodded in acceptance of the lion's apology. "Your strength is a gift, lion," the tortoise said softly. "But never forget that wisdom is also a strength, one that will guide you when power alone cannot." The lion, now humbled and thoughtful, extended a paw toward the tortoise. "Will you help me, Tortoise?" he asked. "Will you teach me to be wiser so that I may rule the savannah with both strength and understanding?" The tortoise smiled and placed his small, weathered foot on the lion's paw. "I would be honored to help you, lion. Together we can show the other animals that strength and wisdom are not enemies but allies. A true ruler must possess both to lead with fairness and grace." The animals watching were filled with admiration. They had always respected the lion for his strength, but now, seeing him willing to learn from the tortoise, they felt a new sense of respect for their king. Word of the lion's humility spread quickly throughout the savannah. The animals, once fearful of their mighty ruler, now began to admire him for his willingness to change. They saw that the lion had learned an important lesson. Leadership was not just about being the strongest, but about being wise, patient, and thoughtful. The smaller animals, who had once been too afraid to speak in the lion's presence, now felt more comfortable around him. They saw that the tortoise's wisdom had softened the lion's arrogance, and they were hopeful that this new partnership would bring peace and balance to the savannah. As the days passed to mend those wounds, he called a gathering of all the animals to announce a new way of ruling. From now on, the lion declared, this savannah will be governed not by force, but by wisdom. Strength will still have its place, but it will serve all creatures, not just the strongest. We will listen to the smallest voices, for they too have much to teach us. The animals cheered in agreement. The lion had truly changed, and the peace that followed was unlike anything they had known before. The tortoise continued to guide the lion, offering advice whenever needed. He taught the lion that wisdom comes not just from books or stories, but from paying attention to the world around him. The tortoise encouraged the lion to observe the ways of the other animals, to learn from their behavior, and to understand their struggles. True wisdom, the tortoise said, is knowing that you do not have all the answers. It is asking questions and seeking knowledge from those who know more. The lion listened carefully, and slowly, he became not just a ruler, but a student of the savannah itself. He learned that every creature, no matter how small, had something valuable to offer. One day, a drought swept across the savannah, and water became scarce. The animals, worried and thirsty, came to the lion for help. In the past, the lion might have responded with force, demanding that the strongest animals find water while ignoring the needs of the smaller creatures. But this time, with the tortoise's wisdom in mind, the lion chose a different approach. We must work together, the lion said. The drought affects us all, and no single creature can solve this alone. Let us combine our strengths and our knowledge to find water. The lion and the tortoise organized the animals into groups. The strongest animals dug deep into the earth, while the clever ones searched for hidden springs. Together, they found a solution, and soon water flowed through the dry savannah once more. The success of their cooperation during the drought brought the animals of the savannah closer together. They realized that, just like the lion and the tortoise, their combined strengths and wisdom made them more powerful as a community. The smaller creatures no longer felt overlooked, and the larger animals no longer believed that their strength alone made them superior. The tortoise's lessons of wisdom and the lion's newfound patience had spread to every corner of the savannah. Now, the animals worked together in harmony, and the savannah flourished. The lion was pleased. He saw that by listening to the tortoise's advice, he had become a better leader, and the respect he earned was genuine, not based on fear. Though the lion had changed for the better, old habits are hard to break. One day, a group of young lions from a distant land came to visit the lion's kingdom. They admired his strength and feared his reputation, unaware of the changes that had taken place in his rule. They praised the lion for his might, telling tales of his battles and his victories over enemies. Hearing their words, the lion felt a flicker of his old pride returning. He remembered the days when he was feared and admired for his strength alone.
In this video, I'm going to share with you how I write my scripts for YouTube videos to ultimately save me.
The tortoise noticed the change in the lion's demeanor and grew concerned. The tortoise approached the lion quietly, sensing that the old arrogance was starting to resurface. "Lion," the tortoise said gently, "do you remember the lessons we have learned together? Strength without wisdom leads to destruction. The respect you have earned now is far greater than the fear you commanded before." The lion listened, but the voices of the young lions still echoed in his mind. "I have grown wise," the lion replied. "But does that mean I must give up my strength entirely? I am still a powerful ruler, and perhaps strength should not be forgotten." The tortoise sighed, knowing that this moment was crucial. "Strength is not the enemy, lion," he said, "but it must be balanced. Do not let the flattery of others lead you away from the path of wisdom." Despite the tortoise's warning, the lion could not shake the feeling of pride that had stirred within him. The young lions continued to praise him, telling tales of distant lands where strength ruled above all else. Their admiration made the lion feel powerful once again, and he began to wonder if perhaps his kingdom had become too soft. One evening, after the young lions had gone, the lion made a decision. He would prove to the animals that he still possessed the strength to rule. Without consulting the tortoise, He declared that a great contest of strength would be held, and that he, the king, would participate to show that his power had not diminished. The animals were confused by the lion's sudden decision, but they dared not question him. The day of the contest arrived, and animals from all over the savannah gathered to watch. The lion had arranged for feats of strength, lifting heavy stones, dragging logs, and racing across the plains. He stood at the center of it all, eager to show his power once more. The tortoise, watching from the sidelines, felt a pang of sadness. He could see that the lion was trying to reclaim his old glory, but he knew that this path would only lead to more arrogance and division among the animals. As the contest began, the lion roared with pride, easily out, and your willingness to listen. Today they were reminded of your old ways, and that is why you feel the distance between you and them. The lion nodded slowly, understanding at last. I see now, he said. I must not let my pride overshadow the wisdom I have gained. The next day, the lion gathered all the animals of the savannah. He stood before them, his head held high, but there was a new humility in his eyes. My friends, the lion began, yesterday I let my pride get the better of me. I thought that by showing my strength, I could remind you of my power as a king. But I see now that true strength is not just in muscles or speed. It is in wisdom, kindness, and patience. The animals listened intently, and a murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. The lion continued, I have learned from the tortoise that leadership is about more than force. I hope you will forgive me for my lapse, and I promise to lead with both strength and wisdom, as I have been taught. The animals cheered, and once again, the lion felt the respect and admiration that came from true leadership. From that day forward, the lion embraced both his strength and his wisdom. He no longer felt the need to prove his power through contests or displays of force. Instead, he worked alongside the tortoise, listening to the animals and finding solutions that benefited all. The lion's true strength was now evident to everyone, not just in his muscles, but in his ability to lead with fairness and thoughtfulness. The young lions who had once admired him for his might began to see him in a new light. They respected him not just for his strength, but for his wisdom and the peace he brought to the savannah. The lion had finally found the balance between strength and wisdom, and the savannah thrived under his rule. The tortoise watched with quiet pride as the lion grew into a wise and just leader. The changes in the savannah were remarkable. Conflicts were solved through discussion, and cooperation flourished. The animals no longer feared the lion's strength, but respected his wisdom and fairness. The tortoise knew his role had been essential, but he never sought recognition for his part in the lion's transformation. As the lion became more self-assured in his wisdom, the tortoise began to step back. He had always preferred a quiet life, and now, with the lion ruling wisely, the tortoise felt his work was done. The animals, however, would never forget the lessons the tortoise had imparted. His legacy of wisdom, patience, and humility would live on in the savannah for generations to come. Under the lion's balanced rule, the savannah entered a golden age of peace and prosperity. The animals lived in harmony, knowing that their king valued fairness over force. Disputes were handled with calm discussions, and the lion often consulted the tortoise for advice on how to maintain this delicate balance. The smaller animals, once too afraid to speak up, found their voices heard and respected. Even the predators, who once relied on brute force, began to adopt more thoughtful approaches to their daily lives. The lion had set a powerful example for all. Strength was important, but it was wisdom that truly held the kingdom together. One quiet afternoon, the lion sat on his rock, gazing across the savannah. The wind blew gently through his mane, and the peace of the land filled his heart with pride. Yet, as he reflected on his journey, he could not help but think of how much he had changed since his earlier days of arrogance and pride. He remembered the contests, the challenges, and the many times he had let his pride lead him astray. But he also remembered the tortoise's calm words and patient guidance. The lion realized how much the tortoise's wisdom had shaped him into the leader he was today. Without the tortoise, the lion would have never understood the true meaning of strength. As time went on, the tortoise grew older, and he knew that it was time to leave the daily affairs of the savannah behind. He had spent years guiding the lion, helping him grow into a leader who ruled with wisdom and strength in equal measure. The tortoise had taught the animals the value of patience and thoughtfulness, and now he felt it was time to enjoy the quiet life he had always cherished. One evening, after a long conversation with the lion about the future of the savannah, the tortoise gently announced his intention to step away from the king's court. "You have all the wisdom you need, lion," the tortoise said softly. "Now it is time for you to lead on your own." The lion bowed his head in respect. "I will always be grateful to you, tortoise," he said. "You have taught me more than I ever thought possible." The news of the tortoise's departure spread quickly through the savannah, and the animals gathered to say farewell to the wise creature who had brought so much peace and prosperity to their land. Though the tortoise had never sought fame, he had earned the love and respect of every animal in the kingdom. The lion, standing beside the tortoise, addressed the crowd. "Today, we say farewell to our dearest friend and advisor, the tortoise. He has taught us the value of wisdom, patience, and humility. His lessons will live on in all of us, and we are forever in his debt." The animals cheered for the tortoise, their hearts filled with gratitude. Though he would no longer walk among them every day, his influence would remain forever. After his farewell, the tortoise retreated to the quiet edge of the savannah, where he could live in peace, away from the hustle and bustle of the kingdom. He found a small grove of trees by a gentle stream and built himself a simple shelter. Here, the tortoise spent his days in contemplation, reflecting on the many years he had spent helping the lion and the other animals. Though he no longer had a daily role in the affairs of the kingdom, the tortoise knew his work had made a lasting impact. From time to time, young animals would come to visit him, seeking his wisdom on various matters. The tortoise, always happy to share his knowledge, would offer gentle advice, just as he had always done. Even after the tortoise's departure, the lion continued to rule with the same wisdom and fairness he had learned from his old friend. He no longer needed the constant guidance of the tortoise, for the lessons had become a part of him. The lion knew how to lead with both strength and compassion, and he worked tirelessly to ensure that every animal in the kingdom felt valued and heard. The lion's rule became a symbol of balance, and animals from distant lands came to learn from the wisdom of the savannah. They marveled at how a once fearsome king had transformed into a leader who valued fairness and kindness above all else. As the years passed, the young lions who had once admired the lion for his strength began to see him in a new light. They realized that it was not his power that made him a great ruler, but his wisdom and humility. The young lions, eager to learn, began to seek out the lion for guidance. The lion welcomed them, remembering how his own journey had begun. He shared the lessons he had learned from the tortoise, teaching the young lions that true strength comes from understanding when to use force and when to rely on patience and thoughtfulness. The young lions listened eagerly, knowing that the wisdom they gained from the lion would help them become great leaders in their own time. Under the lion's continued leadership, the savannah flourished. The animals worked together in harmony, each contributing their unique strengths to the kingdom. The smaller creatures no longer feared being overlooked, and the larger animals no longer saw themselves as superior simply because of their strength. The lion's fair and balanced rule ensured that all animals were treated with respect. And the peace that had begun during the tortoise's time as advisor continued to grow. The animals lived without fear of conflict, knowing that their king would always consider every voice before making decisions. The savannah had become a true symbol of unity and balance. One day, after many years of peace and prosperity, the tortoise decided to make one final visit to the lion. Though he had lived in quiet retirement, he was curious to see how the kingdom had grown under the lion's rule. Slowly, the tortoise made his way back to the center of the savannah, where the lion's rock still stood tall. When the lion saw the tortoise approaching, his heart swelled with joy. He rushed to greet his old friend, bowing his head in deep respect. "Tortoise," the lion said warmly, "it is an honor to see you again. You will be pleased to know that the kingdom has thrived thanks to your wisdom." The tortoise smiled, pleased to see the lion so at peace. "I knew you would lead well, lion," he said. "You have proven that strength and wisdom together create a kingdom where all can flourish." The animals, upon hearing that the tortoise had returned, gathered once again to show their gratitude. They had not forgotten the tortoise's role in shaping their peaceful kingdom, and they wanted to honor him one last time. The lion, sensing the importance of the moment, called for a great celebration in the tortoise's honor. Under the bright sun, the animals shared stories of how the tortoise's wisdom had touched their lives. The lion, standing beside the tortoise, listened with pride as each animal spoke of the lessons they had learned from the wise creature. The tortoise, ever humble, smiled as he listened. He had never sought recognition, but the animal's gratitude warmed his heart. As the celebration continued, the tortoise looked around at the animals gathered in his honor. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life he had lived and the impact he had made on the kingdom. Though he had always preferred a quiet existence, the tortoise realized that helping the lion and the animals had been a greater purpose than he had ever imagined. He turned to the lion, who stood tall beside him, and said, "Thank you, lion, for listening to my words when others might not have. You were willing to change, and that is what has brought peace to this land. I am proud to have been your advisor and your friend." The lion bowed his head in respect. "No, tortoise," he said humbly. "It is I who should thank you. Without your wisdom, I would still be a ruler who relied only on strength. You have shown me a better way." The tortoise's final visit became more than just a celebration of his wisdom. It was a lesson for all the animals in the savannah. The younger generations, who had heard stories of the tortoise's cleverness, now witnessed firsthand the respect and admiration he had earned. As the festivities continued, the tortoise took a moment to speak to the young animals gathered around him. "Remember this," the tortoise said. "Wisdom is not something that comes all at once. It is learned over time through patience and experience. You may not be the strongest or the fastest, but if you are thoughtful and kind, you will always find a way to succeed." The young animals listened closely, knowing that these were words they would carry with them throughout their lives. That night, after the celebration had ended and the savannah had grown quiet, the lion sat on his rock and reflected on the day's events. He thought about how far he had come, from an arrogant king who ruled through fear to a wise leader who listened to his subjects. The lion realized that the tortoise's teachings had not only changed him, but had transformed the entire kingdom. The animals were happier, more united, and stronger together than they had ever been under his old rule of might. The lion felt a deep sense of pride, not in his strength, but in his ability to change. He knew that this balance of strength and wisdom was what made him a true leader. After spending some time with the animals, the tortoise felt it was time to return to his peaceful life by the stream. He did not want a grand farewell or more celebrations. Instead, he quietly slipped away in the early morning, leaving behind the bustling savannah to find the solitude he cherished. The lion, noticing the tortoise's absence later that day, understood his friend's desire for peace. He did not send anyone after the tortoise, knowing that his quiet departure was his way of returning to the life he loved. The lion smiled to himself, grateful for everything the tortoise had given him and the kingdom. Though the tortoise had left, his presence would always be felt in the wisdom that guided the savannah. With the tortoise gone, the lion took it upon himself to ensure that the wisdom he had learned would not be forgotten. He began to teach the younger animals, holding gatherings where they could learn about patience, kindness, and thoughtful decision-making. The lion shared stories of his own mistakes, using them as lessons to show that even the mightiest leader can learn and grow. The animals of the savannah began to change as well. They became more thoughtful in their actions, solving problems through collaboration rather than competition. The smaller animals, once afraid of being overlooked, now felt empowered to share their ideas, knowing that their voices were valued. The lion's kingdom had truly become a land where both strength and wisdom thrived. As time passed, the young lions who had once looked up to the lion for his strength began to mature into leaders themselves. They had learned not only the importance of physical power, but also the value of wisdom, thanks to the lion's teachings. These young lions were now ready to take on leadership roles. Guided by the principles the lion had instilled in them, one of the young lions, named Cato, was especially eager to prove himself as a wise leader. He had watched the lion carefully over the years, observing how he balanced strength with thoughtfulness. Cato admired how the lion always sought advice from others, even those who were smaller or weaker. He knew that this would be the key to his own success. One day, a dispute arose between the antelopes and the zebras over grazing land. In the past, the lion would have resolved such conflicts with a show of force, but now he allowed Cato to take the lead. It was Cato's chance to prove that he had learned the lessons of wisdom and fairness. Cato called for a meeting of the animals and listened carefully to both sides of the argument. He did not rush to make a decision, instead taking the time to understand the needs of both the antelopes and the zebras. After careful consideration, Cato proposed a solution that allowed both groups to share the grazing land equally. The animals were impressed by Cato's thoughtful approach, and the lion, watching from the sidelines, smiled with pride. Cato's successful handling of the dispute showed the lion that the future of the kingdom was in good hands. The young lions had learned well, and they were ready to carry on the legacy of strength and wisdom that had been passed down to them. The lion felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the savannah would remain a place of peace and prosperity for generations to come. The animals, too, were content, knowing that their leaders cared for their well-being and valued fairness above all else. The kingdom had become a model of harmony, and other lands began to look to the savannah as an example of how to lead with both power and compassion. The lion had achieved what he once thought impossible, a kingdom ruled by both strength and wisdom. Though the tortoise had long since returned to his quiet life by the stream, his wisdom continued to guide the savannah. The animals often spoke of the tortoise's teachings, passing them down to their young. Stories of how the tortoise outwitted the mighty lion had become legendary, not because of the tortoise's cleverness, but because of the lessons they carried. The animals had learned that even the smallest creature could make a difference, and that wisdom was not bound by size or strength. The tortoise's legacy had become a living part of the savannah, shaping the way the animals interacted with one another and the way their leaders ruled. As the lion grew older, he became known not just for his strength, but for his wisdom and humility. He had learned many lessons over the years, but the most important one was that true leadership comes from within. It is not just about being strong or powerful, but about being willing to learn, to listen, and to grow. One day, as the lion rested on his rock, he looked out over the savannah and thought about everything he had accomplished. The kingdom was peaceful, the animals were united, and the young lions were ready to lead the next generation. The lion knew that his time as king would eventually come to an end, but he was at peace with that. He had done his part, and he had done it well. His final lesson to the kingdom was simple. True strength is not just in what you can lift, but in how you lift others. As the years passed, the lion grew old and weary. His once powerful body, though still strong, no longer had the same energy it once did. He knew his time as king was coming to an end, but he was not saddened by this realization. Instead, he felt content, knowing that the young lions were ready to take on the responsibility of leadership. One day, the lion gathered all the animals of the savannah for a final meeting. "My friends," he said, his voice still deep and commanding, "I have ruled this kingdom for many years, but now it is time for me to step aside. The future belongs to the next generation, and I trust that they will lead with the same wisdom and strength that has guided us all." The animals, though sad to see their beloved king step down, understood that this was the natural course of life. With the lion's departure, Cato and the other young lions stepped into their new roles as leaders of the savannah. They had learned from the best, the lion who had balanced power with wisdom, and the tortoise whose teachings had shaped the kingdom into a land of peace and unity. Under their leadership, the savannah continued to thrive. The young lions ruled with fairness and kindness, just as the lion had taught them. They listened to the voices of all the animals, valuing the contributions of every creature, no matter how small. A new era had begun, but the principles of strength and wisdom that had guided the kingdom for so long remained at its core. This concludes chapters 81 to 92. Would you like me to continue with the final chapters of the story? As the young lions took over leadership of the savannah, they carried with them the lessons of the lion's rule. The older animals often reminisced about the days when the lion had first transformed into a wise and just ruler, guided by the tortoise's wisdom. His legacy was one of growth, learning, and the balance between strength and intelligence. The lion's name became synonymous with fairness and leadership, not because of the power he once wielded, but because of the humility and wisdom he gained through his journey. The young lions, particularly Cato, vowed to uphold the values the lion had instilled in them, ensuring that his legacy would endure for generations. Under the new leadership, the kingdom continued to thrive in harmony. The animals no longer saw strength as the ultimate source of power, but instead valued collaboration, wisdom, and patience. Disputes were handled with calm discussions, and the young lions often invoked the lion's teachings when making decisions. The savannah had become a place where every creature, no matter their size or strength, played an important role in the success of the kingdom. The lion's lessons lived on in every decision the young leaders made, and the animals looked forward to a future filled with peace, unity, and respect. Back in his peaceful grove, the tortoise lived a simple and contented life. He had returned to the quiet existence he had always loved, far from the busyness of the kingdom. Though he no longer played an active role in the savannah's affairs, the tortoise knew that his influence had left a lasting mark on the kingdom. From time to time, young animals would still visit the tortoise, seeking his wisdom and advice. The tortoise, ever humble, would share his knowledge, but always reminded them that wisdom was not something he alone possessed. Wisdom, he often said, comes from experience, from listening, and from being patient. The animals left the tortoise's grove with a deeper understanding of life, knowing that the smallest creatures could offer the greatest lessons. The lion, now old and weary, spent his final days in peace. He no longer roared to announce his presence or patrolled the savannah to show his strength. Instead, he spent his time reflecting on the journey he had taken, from a ruler who once thought strength was everything to a wise king who had learned the value of humility. The lion often thought of the tortoise, who had been both a mentor and a friend. He marveled at how much he had changed, and how the tortoise's gentle guidance had transformed him into the ruler the savannah needed. As he watched the younger generation lead with fairness and compassion, the lion felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had done his part, and now it was time to rest. Under Cato's leadership, the young lions ruled the savannah with the same wisdom and balance the lion had demonstrated. They worked together with the other animals to ensure that the kingdom remained a place of peace and prosperity. The young lions understood that their strength was important, but they also knew that true leadership came from listening and learning. Cato often visited the spot where the lion had once sat atop his rock, gazing out over the kingdom. There, he would reflect on the lessons he had learned and the responsibility that came with leadership. He knew that as long as the young lions led with fairness and wisdom, the savannah would remain united. The stories of the lion and the tortoise became legends in the savannah, passed down from one generation to the next. Around campfires and under the stars, the animals would tell tales of how the lion had been outwitted by the clever tortoise, and how those lessons had shaped the kingdom into a place of peace. Young animals grew up hearing these stories, and they learned that wisdom could overcome even the mightiest strength. They admired both the lion and the tortoise, not just for their roles in the kingdom's history, but for the lessons they had taught about humility, patience, and the importance of working together. As the lion neared the end of his life, he gathered the animals for one last meeting. He wanted to share his final lesson with them, a lesson that had been at the heart of his transformation. The animals, young and old, gathered around him, eager to hear the lion's words one last time. "Strength is important," the lion began, his voice soft but steady. "But without wisdom, strength can lead to destruction. I have learned that true power comes not from how much we can lift or how fast we can run, but from how well we can listen, how much we can learn, and how kind we can be to others." The animals nodded, absorbing the lion's final message. "Remember this," the lion continued. "A kingdom built on strength alone will crumble, but a kingdom built on wisdom, fairness, and understanding will last forever." After the lion's passing, the savannah mourned the loss of its beloved king. But even in their sadness, the animals knew that the lion's legacy would live on in the way they ruled and in the way they treated one another. Cato and the other young lions continued to lead with the same balance of strength and wisdom, ensuring that the lessons of the lion and the tortoise would never be forgotten. The tortoise, now even older and wiser, remained in his quiet grove, content with the knowledge that the kingdom was in good hands. The peace and unity that had been built over the years continued to thrive, and the savannah remained a place where every animal, no matter their size or strength, had a voice. And so the tale of the lion and the clever tortoise became more than just a story. It became the foundation upon which the kingdom stood, a reminder to all that true leadership is found not in power alone, but in the wisdom to use that power wisely.